Yeah, so it's the beginning of our wet season, and it's literally raining cats and dogs right now. So how you doing, Chloe? How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing good. Been busy with work, but progress.
Same here.
Yeah. So everyone's been busy with work. That's good. From the work angle, sort of. I got my confirmation letter today from my new job, so that was a good one for me as well.
That's good.
That's awesome, dude. Congratulations.
Is
Yeah,
it?
thanks, man.
What's the change in commute?
You said?
What's the change in commute? Is it like slightly better than what it is now?
Well, sure. Way better.
That's good.
Yeah. So, guys, welcome to Critical African Thinkers. Like we all know, this is a place where we x-ray everything under the microscope of logic. And these conversations or this series that I'm going to be doing with Chloe every other Friday, we're going to be discussing, talking about a lot of interesting stuff. And you're always welcome to join the conversation. Make sure you like the stream when you come to the stream, and subscribe if you're not subscribed. Um, if you would like to join our Discord community, there's a link in the description box, and you can click the link and join the Discord community. You can also support the stream you know, with super chats and super stickers if you're so inclined to. So let's jump right into the conversation for today. Conversation for today: what is a woman? That's the that's the question that I don't think anybody has been able to answer for the last 2,000 years or the last 2 years. I don't know which one is it, but I'm sure that Steve and Chloe would be able to give me an idea of what exactly a woman is. And we all know where this came from. It all came from the question given to Ketanji Brown about, what exactly is a woman, and she wouldn't. I don't think she could not, but she wouldn't provide an answer to that question. So, what is a woman? Let's start from that.
I think like traditionally, it's just like adult human female. That's kind of that. But then the thing is that you have to talk about like what level are you talking? Like what are you specifically talking about? Like because people say like woman, like I feel like a woman, right? But in that sense, they're more so talking about like a cultural role or like how people are treating them, which is kind of at this point kind of divorced from um biological reality, which is the basics of it is that like if there wasn't any biological difference between men and women, there wouldn't be like men and women, right? But because society has evolved and culture and we've kind of grown in based off of that biological reality, is kind of made a groove in society, right? And because things have moved around and there are just so much many more abstractions on top of it, there is now this thing called womanhood, right? That all these different cultures have made room for, that is getting kind of more, it's separated more and more from the actual original reason why those womanhood actually exists, which is the biological reality. And so it's at a certain point, it's kind of like, if you think of the Grand Canyon, right? The Grand Canyon was formed through water just carving its way through the earth, but the water, like all that water isn't there anymore, but the effects of it are there, and we can fit a lot of more things in the Grand Canyon. But that doesn't mean that we can essentially create a new Grand Canyon just with dynamite and call it the same thing. And I think that in that sense, because in terms of the cultural aspect of it, it has become a little bit more abstracted from the biological reality of it, and it's just kind of like it's a big groove. People who are not biological women can now like fit into that or mold themselves to fit into that. And I think that that's where, in a sense, trans women fit into. But you know, um, again, like we have to define, like, are you talking about like the strict like biological medical definition, because it matters if someone is a man or a woman biologically in like the medical field, right? If you're doing trials, if you're doing drug trials, like you wouldn't want to mix up data from a trans woman and a biological cis woman when determining trends, or if a drug is dangerous or not in certain doses. You wouldn't want to mix up that data. You would want to distinguish those things. But in terms of men's and women's sections in the clothing store, yeah, it's up to whatever society views as male or female clothes, or men and clothes for men and women. So we have to talk about on what level. So, I mean, but like legally, I mean, like, or just on a basic definition, it should be pretty simple. It's like adult female woman, adult female human, right? But it's now very, very political. So I understand why she didn't answer in like the straightforward way. And that's why she was asked that question, because that question inherently now is very political.
All right. So let's get to you, Steve, then Cody, before I give my thoughts.
All right. So my question to Chloe is this: would you consider biology nature?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we have here is a fallacy of the naturalistic fallacy. So to say that because something is natural, it must be good is a fallacious.
The thing is, I never said anything about good or bad.
I never said that you did.
Okay. So yeah.
Well, let me continue. The problem that people make, and I'm not saying you're making this statement, Chloe. I did not put words in your mouth. I just asked you a question. The problem that I find that when I'm listening to people speak, and there's people that say, well, being trans is unnatural. It's an argument from nature. It's the naturalistic fallacy, which is not all things in nature are inherently good or bad. If you say, well, it's unnatural, you're saying that the natural thing would be something that is good. Well, we know that hurricanes are not exactly good for human beings, right? So what you have here is you have a case of first of all, it's the wrong argument. You know what I mean? And so when we take into account the naturalistic fallacy, we realize that we are even further away from the answer than we started with. If you look into I'm going to use Peterson here for a second, Jordan Peterson. So he'd like to use the gender studies, the Scandinavian gender studies, which I've looked at. And we all know the saying, the more egalitarian a society becomes, the different, the larger the gap in difference between genders. Okay, well, what happens when you have a society that can do whatever they want? They feel safe. There's a certain level of safety to that society, and it allows you the opportunity to stretch out, to actually go out and be and do different things. The fact that we have trans people in our society is evidence of the fact that we have a more egalitarian society than we have ever had before, because we're not continuously under threat of war, invasion, and pestilence, and all the horrible things that happen to human beings that are, by the way, natural. So we can at least look at it from the perspective that it's possible that as a society becomes more egalitarian, those gender differences, not sex differences, but gender differences, can get even larger as well, because we're in a state of comfort where we don't have to fight. And so I just wanted to kind of take it to those two different levels, because there's the third level, which is, what is a woman? Well, I don't know. They spent an entire generation trying to eschew gender normative binaries of what is supposed to be a woman. Is she supposed to just be in the kitchen making a sandwich? No, you're not. So there was a whole entire 100 years of a movement that helped women break out of this mold that society themselves put them in, and none of us are complaining about it, are we? So we have to be honest with ourselves about this argument, and take a little bit more of a holistic view of the entire situation, so that we can at least look at it through non-discriminatory, unbiased eyes.
Steve, okay, so now what is very, very telling from the whole thing you just said now is that One, you did not provide any definition of what a woman is. In almost your last statement, you said that women were treated in a certain way, they were put in a certain box. Who are you referring to? Who are you referring to that were confined to making dinner and just being household set of people? Who exactly are you referring to if you did not even define, yet you have ascribed certain characteristics, whether they were social, whether they were biological, or whatever? You have ascribed certain characteristics to a particular set of people, yet you could not define them. Now, you made an analogy with the hurricane and all that. Would you tell me that a hurricane and an earthquake, they are the same thing? They are both forces of nature, they are both destructive forces, but they are not exactly the same thing. So what if someone comes and tells you that, you know what, this earthquake is actually a hurricane? It's identifying as a hurricane. Would you say that is true? Both of them exist in nature very well. We can accept that they exist in nature. And I'm not denying that there are trans people. Obviously, there are trans people. But the issue isn't a trans person. The issue is, what is a woman? You
Mhm.
understand? For the fact that you even use trans in front of a woman shows that you are qualifying woman in the first place. There's something there. There's something that is not quite the same. That's why you're using that qualifier in the first place. So before we proceed, I'd really like to get a definition of what is a woman. You can't tell me that there is no definition of a woman and then ascribe characteristics to women. It doesn't, to me, it seriously doesn't make any sense to me in that regard. So maybe you can
Well,
attempt that, or we can go straight
I,
to Cody.
I would also like to point out that like the question of this discussion isn't if is trans natural or not, and
oh,
I
but the
think
question eventually does come up.
well, yeah, it does come up, but that doesn't mean that it has to come up in this conversation. I don't even think Charles is disagreeing that trans people exist, and it doesn't even matter if it's natural or not. If they exist, glasses exist. They're not natural. Like I'm not doing something natural right now, even by talking on the internet. A lot of things exist, whether or not they're natural, and of course, plagues exist, and those are completely natural. So I don't really understand why it makes sense to bring up if it's natural or not in this conversation. Yeah, someone randomly like Ted Kaczynski thought all like technology, and he was willing to like blow up scientists because
Because
he thought they were unnatural.
the question itself requires itself to be answered in a naturalistic way. The
No,
question posed is, what is a woman,
but
which
it,
is
Steve,
it's a
stop.
construct.
That's not true.
it's
That's not
yeah
true. It doesn't
it
require you to provide a natural. You are answering an argument that we have not proposed, or you're answering a question that we have not asked. That is like maybe a third or a tertiary question. You understand? So
yeah
the primary question here is, what is a woman?
and that's why I said like there's a basic nature biological aspect to that question, and then there's a social one, and that's why I said that's where trans women fit in, the social one. But the social one is tied to the origins. The origins of that one is tied to the biological basis. But you can have a different abstraction, like for example, like we have strawberry flavored candy. Strawberry flavored candy wouldn't exist without the existence of strawberries, but now strawberry flavored candy can be made without any strawberries.
Can I answer the question that was posed to me?
Okay.
So what I'm meaning by, and I wasn't able to finish, was when you're talking about asking a question, what is a woman? You immediately have to invoke nature, because the concept of woman does not exist in nature. We gave it a name and a concept to go along with the name. Therefore, the question itself is a naturalistic question.
Cody, go ahead. Steve, I'll address that later. Let's give Cody time to speak.
Hello,
Cody,
can
go
you hear
ahead.
me?
Yeah, we can
Mhm.
hear you.
Okay, then. So, my answer to the question, what is a woman, would be it depends. Because, see, when we're talking about a woman, we're specifically talking about concepts of gender and gender roles. And to go for definitions, I pulled up a copy of an anthropology book that I have online titled Anthropology: What Does It Mean to Be Human by Robert H. Levinda. And in the section on sex, gender, and kinship, I will read some excerpts from it. And it says that Cross-cultural research repeatedly demonstrates that physical sex differences do not allow us to predict the roles that females or males will play in a particular society. Consequently, anthropologists distinguish sex from gender, the cultural construction or in the cultural construction of beliefs and behaviors considered appropriate for each sex. I'll go back earlier where it says, anthropologists use the term sex to refer to observable physical characteristics that distinguish the two kinds of human beings, females and males, need for reproduction. People everywhere pay attention to morphological sex, the appearance of external genitalia and observable secondary sex characteristics, such as enlarged breasts in females. Scientists further distinguish females from males on the basis of gonadal sex, the presence of ovaries in females and testes in males, and chromosomal sex, two X chromosomes in females and XY chromosome in males. And outward physical appearance features used to distinguish females from males may not be obvious either. Sometimes genetic or hormonal factors produce ambiguous external genitalia, a phenomenon called hermaphrodism, or the intersexism is becoming more popular. And they further drive home the point with a comment saying, in some societies, people with XX chromosomes do the cooking, and others XY people who cook, and others XX and XY people cook. The same goes for sewing, transplanting rice seedlings, worshiping deities, and speaking in public. Even the exclusion of women from hunting and warfare has been reduced by recent studies from the level of universal to generality. While it is generally true that men hunt and women do not hunt, and that men fight in wars and women do not, important counter cases exist. It also goes into details too about the third genders in different cultures, including amongst Native Americans and East Asians. So the point that I would try to drive home is that there's a difference between gender and sex. Sex is biological, gender is cultural, and what a woman is differs between different cultures. And of course, woman is an English term. So when we're talking about this, we're of course limiting ourselves to the English speaking world.
Okay, so Cody, are you done for now?
Yes.
Okay. Now, it's very interesting that even in this statement that you were making, you kept saying men were allowed to do certain things, women were allowed to do certain things, women were not allowed to hunt. How did that society that prevented women from hunting, how did they identify who is a woman to not allow her to hunt? Because that is a secondary, that discrimination is a secondary factor. The primary factor is that there was something that is identifiable, that identifies this person as a woman, for you to now apply that social construction. When we talk about gender is a social construct, I think that's bullshit. And the reason why I think that's bullshit is that even gender roles are fluid. There is no fixed there is no way it is written that a woman must be in the kitchen or a man must not do this or a woman must do this. Although there are certain cultures that ascribe certain roles, but those roles are even ascribed, based on observable physical characteristics. You understand? Take myself, for example. I'm not what you call the typical male because there are certain things of the males typical that men typically do that I don't like or I don't do. Sports, for example. I'm not a huge fan of sports, you understand? And some other things. And I from my childhood have been very domesticated. I can cook, I can clean, I can take care of, do all those things that typically are ascribed to women. So it is not the case that um, it is the social construction that has brought about a woman. No, it is the fact that there is something objective around which social constructions were built. And until we get that root, what exactly is that thing? What
Sex.
exactly is that thing that the social construction is built around? Then we can now go further from there. So I don't think that gender and sex are two separate things. I think they are linked. Yes, gender roles might be fluid, but they are still based on something that is observably different or distinct.
Okay, I would like to add that that part that I was reading about hunting was a quote written in the book by Barbara Miller. I will also read the further definitions in which they state sex is observable physical characteristics that distinguish two kinds of humans, females and males, needed for biological reproduction. Gender is the cultural construction of beliefs and behaviors considered appropriate for each sex. So, yes, they are linked, and we're talking about cultural concepts. This is similar to the conversations we've had about race and racial stereotypes, about the behaviors that are considered appropriate for people based on how they are racialized.
Okay, now, first of all, gender differences do not equate seamlessly. As in, racial differences do not equate
I
seamlessly the
know, I
way
know.
gender
It's
differences
I'm trying to
equate.
just draw parallels. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
they are exactly the same.
Okay. Okay. So now, my response to that would be, um, I don't even know why this is controversial in the first place, because we can say that, you know what, these stereotypes that are built around women isn't good. We should break down these stereotypes. You understand? It's not good. It's limiting women. But to say that there is nothing like a woman, I mean, I really don't. I really don't get it. We can say that consigning women to the kitchen is not a good idea. We can say that saying only men should hold certain positions is not a good idea. But saying that that construction itself means that there is no such thing as a woman is, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, and it's not
I'll
clicking. It isn't
I'll
clicking.
give Okay, basically you're bringing about this conversation because of the hearings with Katanji Brown and becoming Supreme Court justice and the questions being asked to her by certain politicians. So I think the issue is that the politicians asking her this question were trying to get a concise definition of what a woman is. The issue is that they were bringing their own cultural biases about what behaviors are acceptable from a female. And Ketanji Brown Jackson was not willing to create a universally concise definition for what behaviors are appropriate from a female, let alone reinforce the cultural beliefs that were coming from the questioner. The issue
But
is that the people asking these questions are trying to reinforce their own cultural biases of what's appropriate from a female and also trying to project them onto other people and make them conform to their cultural beliefs.
so for the question, what is a woman? I think that we have to acknowledge originally it kind of got brought up with the Dr. Phil show with Matt Walsh saying, basically saying that asking those two that trans couple as to what is a woman, and they couldn't say, and he could say what it was. He said it's a biological thing. And when you, if I think like that's the definition, that him saying, asking that question is what inspired them to ask that question to Brown. And the thing is, they wanted that answer, and saying it's an adult human female has nothing to do with behavior. You can actually give an answer without ascribing to women are pretty and they wear dresses. Like, I don't think that, they were looking for the answer for her to say, well, women are people who wear dresses and have babies and cook in the kitchen and wear makeup. Like, I think we're even conservatives are beyond even that type of definition, because that describes more femininity, as opposed to, like, you can have a woman who's not feminine at all. And I think we're at the point where we can completely agree. So I think that people are conflating to like what is femininity is different than what is a woman.
Yeah, but I remember that interview a bit differently because I remember the trans couple that were interviewed earlier. I forget their names, but they explained that gender. They explained, if I remember correctly, sex is what is between your legs. Gender is what's between your ears. So, going on to describe the distinction of sex being biological, gender being behavioral, and Matt Walsh later conflated the two by saying that you can tell women apart by what's in their bones, and that you can do anthropological studies in order to sex skeletons, and that is not an exact science. He was not being very accurate there. Forensic anthropology is a fuzzy thing, so I have issues with how people have interpreted that Dr. Phillips.
But the thing is, to get to Matt Walsh's point, he's saying it is biological, right? He's not an anthropologist. He's not a strictly a biologist, but he is saying this is what I consider a woman, and it's based off of biological markers. And yes, intersex conditions exist, but those are outliers, and I don't think that we can like completely change a whole definition because of some outliers that are aberrations in terms of the whole species.
I think the issue is that he's conflating biological sex with the behaviors that are considered appropriate for people based on sex.
Cody.
Sorry, let me finish, please. Let me finish. To the point in reinforcing ideas of biological determinism, thus assuming that because people are sexed a certain way, that they should then only behave in certain ways or conform to the gender roles that are expected of them and the culture that they exist, and that any deviation from that is somehow immoral. That's
no. From what I saw, the Matt Walsh, kind of he wasn't against people from being gender nonconforming. He wasn't against that at all. Like when he was posed with the question as, what if you have a kid that likes to play with dolls? That's a boy, but he likes to play with dolls or wear dresses, and his response was, let him do that. Right. So I think that there is a misinterpretation of the conservative argument about what is a woman, because I think from their standpoint, it is just biological. And I don't think it means that they're automatically saying, well, because someone is biologically a woman, they shouldn't behave in a certain way. I think they're already conceding you can behave in any way that you want to, but don't say that you are this thing that they consider like that has biological constraints.
Again, I think you're conflating gender with sex, because you can't be a biological woman, you're a biological female. If you're a woman, you're embodying feminine gender.
But the thing is that's how some people define what a woman is. And even if you talk to some feminists, it is just a woman is an adult human female. That is, like, if you ask them that question, that is what they will say. And that's where it ends. And they don't believe in gender. Like, you can believe that someone is a woman and not believe in gender.
Okay, so you're talking about TERFs and gender critical feminists.
Yeah, they're gender critical. Like I'm willing to listen to their arguments. And the thing is that, and I've listened to a lot of different, so I've listened to trans people, I've listened to detransitioners, I've listened to all these different types of arguments. And at the end of the day, that's the only stable definition that we can kind of have. And to decouple, I agree, we should kind of especially in our modern society, we should kind of decouple a lot of these archaic things from sex from gender, because women shouldn't do cognitive intensive tasks. I've read the Yellow Wallpaper. It's horrifying of what they used to do to women. But we don't really necessarily believe in those things anymore. And also technologically, we have a lot of, technological stopgaps that make these biological differences not really matter anymore. Like we have sanitary pads, we have hormonal birth control that can, some people have periods so bad that, they're going to be laid up for a whole week. I know someone that literally, has they have periods so bad that it lasts 3 weeks, right? They literally might have to go into the hospital because it's so bad. And also the fact that garage doors, they're literally engineered so that you don't need to be a huge burly strong man to operate a garage door. If the power goes out, you can still lift it, right? I can lift it, and I'm not necessarily that athletic, right? So I do agree that there is a difference between the social roles, but I think that means that for some people, when they hear woman, they hear gender role, and some other people, when they hear woman, they hear adult human female. And we have two definitions. That's what I'm saying. There are two definitions of woman based off of the aspects of the level that you're talking about. Some people are literally just talking about biology, and other people are literally just talking about social roles.
Yeah, so we're talking about the difference between connotative definitions and denotative definitions, the definitions that differ between different contexts and definitions that are written in certain texts. That's why I specifically went for an anthropological text in order to get the anthropological definitions. You will find different definitions in different fields of study.
Right, but like now these conversations are coming up in things that like sports, right? And there's the reason why female sports is a distinct thing is because of the biology of women, of females, right? And so we can't, like, in that sense, just because they say female sports, well, they're just talking about the gender role, but like female sports does not exist because there's a certain gender role for women in a swimming pool or weightlifting or running or whatever. It is because we are biologically distinct and different from men, and we probably shouldn't be doing MMA sports with a biological man. Probably shouldn't. I probably like, I like it probably shouldn't happen. And so like that is I think a clear example as to when you're using the term woman, where it's more indicative of a biological definition instead of a gender role. Because like, yeah, like if you have like male and female like weightlifting, you're not distinguishing roles as to like, well, women shouldn't, like they're doing the same exact sport and activity, but it just changes who they're physically competing against.
Okay.
So Cody, I have a question for you because you said that Matt Walsh was wrong when he said you could tell who a who a woman is by even looking at her bones, you know, doing all those. You said he was wrong, but yet I I correct me if I'm wrong. I still did not catch your definition of what a woman is. I know you read something about biological sex and how it's different from gender, but I still did not catch a definition from you. What is a woman if mouthwash is wrong in his assertion that a woman can be, you can tell who a woman is by looking at her bones and all that? How do you know that is wrong? What objectively tells you that is wrong in that assessment? So tell me exactly what is a woman and why Matt Walsh is wrong in that regard.
Okay, two different questions there. I'll start with the first one. When Matt Walsh was trying to talk about sexing of skeletons, that is an there's a lot of issues in that because that's generally done through analysis of the sacroiliac joint and the proportions of the skull to the rest of the body. The thing is that the proportions normally used to sex skeletons based on anatomy are not universal. In other words, not every female has wide hips or smaller head to the proportion of their body. And the same with the opposite for males. Not every male has a large head in proportion to his body or narrow hips. Again, those are generally true between the sexes, but not universally. And that was my point about the sexing of skeletons. There is a margin of error, and that includes margin of errors when sexing people in real life. In modern day, that's why intersex people exist. Now, then you wanted to ask me if I had a personal definition of what a woman is. And I really don't. I try not to form very hard concepts such as that. I prefer to remain flexible, and that's why, again, I prefer to cite scientific sources, including the one that I cited on anthropology. So, again, a woman that that is a relative concept that differs between different cultures, and in regards to what the gender roles are assumed of a person that is sexed as female.
So this is what I take from that. What I'm taking from that is that you cannot say Matt Walsh is wrong because you cannot define what a woman is. So if you cannot define what something
No,
is, if you can't no, because you just said you prefer not to give a definition. If you if you cannot objectively say what something is, how can you say someone else is wrong about it?
I'm talking about his comment about sexing people based on, no, I'm sorry, projecting
I'm not.
gender upon anatomy and assuming the gender identity of a person based on their remains.
That was
I'm
No,
not
that
sure
was
he's
if
what
you
I
he's
was
not
if
talking
I'm
about
remembering
someone's
this
gender
incorrectly.
identity. He's not talking about someone's gender identity. And I think you're still conflating that he has to be talking about gender, and he's trying to say if you're a woman, you have to assume these roles. He's just saying this is what a woman is objectively outside of the cultural definition of it.
All right, why don't I pull up the video and listen to it again and maybe play it over so we can hear
and
exactly
and
what it said?
and I feel like there's a kind of a bit too much emphasis of like he could have possibly given any other example as to Like, let's say a person was hit by a car and they're, they can't find their ID, right? And you find that there's just this dead body in the middle of the road. You can tell what sex they are, right? You can tell, like, oh, a woman, like, and you would see like
within a
Jane Doe.
margin of error.
Yeah, Jane Doe or whatever. But like the thing is, in general, like you tend to be right, and we're not necessarily talking about something that everyone 100% will fit in, like 100% of the time. Like we have acknowledged intersect, but they are outliers, right? I mean, in the same way as, like, we can say that about anything in terms of words, like, in terms of evolution, in terms of birds. At what point is a bird species a different species from another closely related species? When do, like, there's two flocks of birds that end up in two different locations, are they separate species when you can look at them and tell that they're two different species, or are they a separate species when we just decide that, right? But we're still talking about an objective biological reality that these birds exist and that they have certain physical characteristics. As to when they're just a separate group that have different phenotypes, or when we're considering them a separate species, that is a human social construct, but we're still pointing to something that is objectively true. And just because we kind of have to delineate, like, we're not going to have a separate word for, all the different intersex conditions in terms of trying to make a gender for all of those people. But in general, like, they tend to follow along, like one line or another, if they have gonads or if they have ovaries, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
so
So
Charles, what did you say to me before?
um, I can't remember, but I think I have another question, or I have another point that I want to make. Now, you were saying something about margin of error and all that, that not everybody falls into this category. You know what? That applies to almost everything in life. Take language, for
Yeah.
example. Human beings are human beings are gifted with speech. We're about the only creatures that can speak. But the truth is, not everybody can actually speak. There are some people who are born uh, dumb. There are some people who are born mute. So, are we going to say on that regard, do human beings have speech? Someone is not going to tell me, well, we can't say human beings can speak or not because it doesn't apply to all humans, or there's a margin of error and that will encapsulate certain people who cannot speak. So therefore, we cannot categorically say human beings can speak. Speaking is speaking is a feature of most human beings. It's not a feature of every human being, but it's something that is that is true for most people. It's the same thing with this gender or sex thing. It is true for most human beings that you are either born with a male genitalia or a female genitalia, while there are also outliers, which are the exceptions. They are not the rule, and you do not define things by the exceptions. We can make allowances and say yes, these people exist and they are human beings too. We're not going to trying to deny them their existence based on the fact that they don't fit into either of both categories is wrong. But denying both categories in the first place is wrong, and it's bonkers. It doesn't make any logical sense to me. And that's why this thing is so simple, yet it's so complicated, because a lot of the times you are reading definitions into what people are not even saying. Matt Walsh's definition wasn't even talking about social construction. On the other hand, what exactly about human behavior is not a social construction? For the fact that it's a social construction, does that make it not real? There's almost nothing. We are all social beings. We learn everything, almost everything that we become. We learn it from our environment. But that doesn't mean that we're not humans. We learn how to walk, we learn how to talk. Those things are, in a sense, you can say they are social constructions, because I may speak a different language from the language you're speaking, and that is based on the social cultural environment that I grew up in. But that doesn't mean that language isn't real. So that's the point I'm trying to get it from. So when Matt is giving a definition and is giving a purely scientific and biological definition, but the other side is conflating it and saying, no, this is what he actually means. He's actually stereotyping women. He's actually bringing in roles. He never said anything about roles. He just said something about this is a definition. So if one side is at least providing a definition, whether or not their definition is right, and the other side is not providing any definition at all, I think I'm going to have to go with who is at least trying to give a definition than the than who is not giving any definition and just leaving it open ended for anybody to define for themselves.
Okay, I'm a little lost because there was a lot there. So, uh, can you try to make your point again a bit more concisely?
Okay, so my point is almost everything in life there is an exception to it, and for the fact that there is an exception does not mean we cannot objectively define things and recognize the exceptions. And it does not mean that things are defined by their exceptions. There's a reason why they are exceptions in the first place, because they are a deviation from quote and unquote the norm. So when you say there are people who do not fit into either a male or a female characteristic, that is understandable, but it does not negate that there is a binary in human beings. The existence of intersex people is an exception, and an exception can only exist when there is a rule which applies for the majority. You understand? So that's the point where I'm coming from. I'm just trying to, tackle you on the point where you say there's a statistical um, um, border deviation or something that it doesn't apply for all humans. Of course, not all women have broad hips, not all men have narrow hips. So if you are going to be looking at the skeleton of 100 dead people, you might not get it accurately all the time, but you are going to have a higher frequency of being able to identify who a woman is from who a man is by just looking at their hip bones. You definitely are not going to get 100%, but you're going to get close to a number that is statistically significant enough for it to be true. That's the point I was trying to make.
Okay, I won't disagree with you in general on any of that. I would make the point, though, that I think that if you find exceptions to a rule, that it kind of proves the invalid a rule is. So my point would be that there needs to be a general understanding about the idea of either being binaries when regards to sex is rather false. Sex is more of a spectrum, and that depends a lot on, again, chromosomes versus sex organs. There's not always a direct correlation. And then again, we're talking about gender as well, which again is behaviors that are assumed appropriate from people based on sex within a culture.
Yeah, but still, to Charles' point, like there is still a line, and the majority of people, like the number of people who are intersex, are such a small portion. And yes, we can note that they are exceptions. Like there are some people who are born without legs. There are some people who are born blind. And so like you getting back to what he was saying is like we can't say that like, oh well, humans can see or humans can speak, because there are some people that can't do either or both. And but like at the end of the day, the majority of people will fall on one side of that binary. And this doesn't necessarily, and we're not even talking about behavior, we're not even talking about social 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 what people should do. And I know many people, I know actually quite a few people who are intersex, right? And for them, it like they ended up either on one side of the binary. I know one person who literally could not be sexed at birth. And so what the doctor did was, we're not going to cut anything off, we're not going to change anything, we're just going to have to wait till they grow up to see what side of the binary they're going to fall on. And then I think they're in Oregon, and then they kind of officially determine their gender marker legally. Because again, like, yeah, that's what we're talking about in terms of on a certain level, in terms of like a driver's license. Because now if you look at him, he looks like a man, right? But at the end of the day, I think just because there's no one rule really that applies 100% to everything. And yeah, we have to make exceptions sometimes, but to have that as your standard as to, well, the rule isn't really good at all applying to anybody because it doesn't apply well to somebody. We have to go for utility And if he works most of the time, it's probably good to hang around.
Okay.
Kevin.
Oh, yep, Kevin.
Sorry, Cody. Kevin, Kevin B. Black. It's been a while. We saw you. Welcome to the conversation. But before you go, let Cody just get his points across. Then Kevin will go.
Okay, then. Just
Yeah.
my concern would be for the people that see those terms aren't utilitarian for. Again, the outliers, they get ignored and thus stigmatized, and
But
that's what I'm worried about, the social impacts of that.
yeah, but like yeah, if but we were just talking about like socially. So if someone is defined as a like so I've heard about somebody, right, who they they are they look female 100%, they grew breasts, they have all this stuff, but it turns out that they're biologically male,
Hmm?
right? And that issue really only like is a big issue for them in terms of when they have to go to the hospital, they kind of have to disclose that they have this they're intersex, right? But socially they're just treated like a woman, right? Because they look like a woman, they sound like a woman, they act like a woman, they behave like all these things. They look like a cisgendered woman, and that's how people treat them. And so it's kind of like I don't know why we have to limit our definitions of what someone is biologically and say, well, it might have social impacts. Well, that's a social thing. And gay people deal with this, people who are of a different disabilities deal with these types of things. And I think that we shouldn't really erase the actual definition of something because downstream someone can treat them badly. That is a separate social issue that we can address and acknowledge that like we shouldn't treat people differently because they're gender nonconforming or that they look different or behave differently if they're not hurting anybody. But like I think we can address that social issue separately from, well, that maybe we shouldn't call people men and women because they socially down the line, they might not fit into either or. I mean, people can make communities, people can be, choose to be gender fluid, in terms of how they behave. I know people who, they call themselves non-binary and they just create community with people that don't treat them like shit. And that's great for them. And but like that socially, it's just we're not guaranteed to have everyone treat us socially as we want to be treated, even if someone is perfectly cisgendered, straight, like heteronormative, all that kind of stuff. There can be a number of social issues of why someone else is going to treat you like dirt, like you root for the wrong sports team. I mean, it's just another one of those arbitrary human things of there can be a number of reasons why people can treat you badly.
Yeah, I generally agree with you. I would like to say I don't think that we should limit people's definitions. I think that we should expand definitions and define things better, such as see better defining the difference between sex and gender, which most people seem to conflate. And again, I would like to give Kevin a chance to talk, so I don't want to.
Sorry. Yeah, go on, Kevin.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I was wondering because my understanding of the issue is that there is no debating about that there's a difference between a man and a woman, right? I think we all can accept that. Accept that differences do exist. But my understanding is, and where I wanted us to try to listen more was why do we categorize stuff the way we do? And my understanding of it is that there's no objective reason that hey, a man is this and a woman is this. It's just societally we come to the understanding that this is the category we want to invent. And therefore I don't see a problem with us expanding those categories and make people feel more inclusive. So that was my small input there.
So you said inclusive. Inclusive into what? What exactly? Are they sharing gifts? Are they sharing gender gifts that some people are not
No, no,
getting
no, no.
because there is no inclusivity?
So there's this movement by the transgender movement for trans people to be acknowledged as their sex. A trans woman wants to be acknowledged that they're a woman. And you heard me?
Mm-hmm. Oh, we just thought you had
Yeah.
something more to say.
Yeah, we hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I guess that's all he was going to add. So like, I think, yeah, Kevin also touched on, and that's why I think like people can say a single word and mean it. And that's why I look at the context when people are using, you know, womanhood, or like, I feel like a woman. And like, it could be like a drag queen saying like, I feel like a woman. Like, I know when they're using that term, they're meaning it in the gender sense. But if I hear on a police report, you know, a woman was stabbed, blah, 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 I know that they're basically talking about a biological woman, right? And because they would note if it's like, you know, like, because they definitely do distinguish between like, you know, a person who like say like, oh, this person is like a transgender person or a cross-dresser or something like that, because when they use the term, it's not the same word, and a lot of words that we say have multiple meanings on top of that. So I don't
But Chloe,
understand. Hmm?
Chloe, when someone is saying they feel like a woman, what exactly does it mean to feel like a woman? You can feel like yourself, but if you are feeling like a woman and the word woman is not unique to you, it means there is something objective about that feeling that is only shared by people who are women. So what does it mean when someone says they are feeling like a woman? What
So
objective value does that statement
so
have?
I think that when they say they feel like a woman, they're talking about the social construct of a woman, right? Of the gender of a woman. And so they're looking at, you know, they are feeling in line with the images or how they see women are treated as a woman. Like, you know, like if, like, let's say like a drag queen, right, is, you know, they have men opening doors for them and saying like miss, and being, you know, not cussing in their appearance, and all these social accoutrement of what we have attached historically to being a woman in our particular history, right? I think that that's primarily what they're talking about, because I have to admit, like, there are a lot of times where I you know, it did get into my head at a certain point of like, do I feel like a woman? There's never been a point in time where I actually thought like, oh, I really feel like a woman now. There could be times where I've been seeing a lot of conversations about women get treated like XYZ, and then I get into a situation where I feel like I'm being treated like how they described women were being treated. And then that sense, I felt discriminated like women, like a woman, right? Or like if I've gone to like a hardware store and no one would help me because I just like a lost little girl wandering around, and they think I'm just trying to look for, you know, like my family or my dad or whatever. And, you know, I'm literally there to do business, you know, to get my blinds cut or to get to order doors or something like that. And so in that sense, that's the closest I've ever felt like maybe saying that phrase, but still it is highly dependent on how people are socially treating me. And again, from my conversations with my trans friends, right, you know, I really did get fascinated at seeing like these conversations with these trans women about, you know, things that they're learning about how women actually socially interact, because before they transition they have this idea of what it's like, and then when they actually get into the situation they're actually noticing real things. They're like, oh, like they're actually talking about things that I've taken for granted in terms of my social interactions with other women. And I found those conversations very fascinating about like going to the club and then they're in the bathroom with all the women and realizing the social dynamics of the women in the bathroom when, you know, they're all fixing their makeup, but they're all competing for the same men, right? And realizing, oh, they're kind of mean to me if they think I'm a threat, right? Or and especially if they, you know, they look like a cis woman, they look like a beautiful cis woman. um and noticing those in those conversations, I thought that was very interesting. And that's where I thought like, yeah, they are being introduced in our social construct of womanhood, and I think that it's very valid, and I think that it's very important to, you know, trans women have a very important space of actually highlighting certain aspects that women can't really differentiate. You know, we just think that this is a normal social thing, and we don't even think that men never deal with it. But that's why I was really drawn to those conversations. But I think that's the closest thing that I really think that that's what they're talking about. Like when they're home at night eating Pop Tarts, watching Netflix, you don't really feel like any gender. You're just picking out and watching Netflix. You can only feel like
Uh,
another gender
yeah.
if someone is socially interacting with you, is what I'm saying.
I agree.
So let's even talk about social construction in the first place. Social construction doesn't happen even in thin air. Let's use race for example. We know race is not a real thing. We know it's a made up thing. But the social construction of racism and race is built around an objective, observable, stereotypical or typical phenotypical feature, which is having more melanin. Having more melanin doesn't confer you any particular features, any particular characteristics, but it does distinguish you from maybe other people who have less melanin than you. So if there is a social construction that is built around that thing, we cannot now say that there was no objective, there is no basis for that categorization. That categorization arose because A could be told apart from B, even though what distinguishes A from B has no substantive value or meaning on its own, but it shows that it was built on something that you can distinguish, something that is distinct, and that's the way I see this gender and sex thing. I am not saying that because a woman is different from a man that a woman should be made to do only certain things. That's not the argument I'm making, or that a man should be made to do certain things. That's not what I'm
But
arguing. What I'm saying is that do we have to first of all understand that there is a difference, and there's a reason why the social constructions around these things are different, is because it is rooted somewhat in the observable differences. Now, whether or not those social constructions are wrong or right, that is not the question I'm here to answer. The question I'm here
but
to answer,
but
first of all, is that is there
but
an observable difference? And I think yes, there is.
no, dear, that's the point, Charles. Everyone is hearing me.
Yes.
Yes.
But Charles, that's the point. There's always an observable difference, but those differences are arbitrary. That is the point. Why is it that a man has to grow a beard and that is considered to be manly? Why do we associate certain characteristics with masculinity and femininity? Those are,
Well, ask the women who love a man with a beard.
but exactly, but that's the point is as a society, the
Why do you
differences
feel it is
do,
society? Why do you feel
because
it's
there's
society?
no,
Why don't
because
you
no,
feel it's
it
something
has to
that's
be
in
because
it?
Can you
no,
let
it's
Kevin
not.
finish?
No, because it's not in it. The words have meaning, and the meaning that they have is meaning what we give to them. Even to your example of a race, we can look at the term is the terminology of race historically and look how that terminology has changed over time and how people has add definition to it and subtract certain definition from it. The definition changes all the time. So what I'm saying, of course, we can observe differences between a man and a woman, but I'm just saying those differences are subjective, while the differences observed are objective. And that is the point of the questioning. Why do we consider this definition? And if we want to take a Foucaultian approach, Foucaultian will talk about power and how people in power and situation have certain right to redefine certain terms. So I agree with you that differences exist, but the question is, why do we define those differences with those categories that we use to define them? That is the question, not if the differences exist.
So I think that there is a difference between the differences that you're talking about, because there are some differences that are like hormonally based. Like the reason why men grow beards is because men produce more testosterone, versus why women generally don't grow beards. Yes, we can grow hair, we can have a little mustache, but that's very, very light. But that is the quality of the hair that we grow on our faces is dependent on the hormones that are running in our bodies. And again, even looking at people, like,
But,
again, like
but
talking.
but a man is not defined by his ability
No,
to grow a beard. That is the
no, no,
point.
No, he's not. Yeah, but still, the reason why, in general, like beards are associated with men is because biologically they have the capacity to grow a beard in a way that women generally do not.
No, because generally we associate masculinity with the deep voice and a person's ability to grow a beard. That is just an arbitrary characteristic that we
It,
associate with
it's
masculinity. There's nothing objective about masculinity, meaning the ability to grow a beard.
But so you're saying masculinity, right? Masculinity, I think, is a social concept, just like femininity. But we're talking about men and women. I'm not automatically saying that all men are masculine, because you can have masculine women and you can have feminine men. And so I think that we're kind of conflating the gender and sex type of thing, because um yeah, like, you can have a masculine woman who's not growing a beard, but we're still associating things like, like the trope of the butch lesbian who plays softball, who likes to drink beers on the weekend, is really into, like, is into sport, likes woodworking. Those activities in general have been associated with masculinity, and yeah,
Hmm.
mostly men, but still we can still say that she's masculine without defining her biologically as a man, or her having a beard.
True. True, but true that what you said is 100% correct. But the point I'm making is those categorization is arbitrary. We can say that here testosterone is what facilitate the growing of a person beard. We can make that. That's a scientific claim. But we can also say that sometimes some females tend to have higher testosterone and they also grow beard. And I'm not sure we wouldn't automatically say that a female who grow beard is a man. I'm just saying that all of
Right.
these characteristics are just
Right.
arbitrary.
I,
Like how we can, there's no problem in as a society. And this is, and I think Charles brought up the perfect example of race, because we can study the definition of race, the etymology of race, and we look, and the definition has always changed over time. Race was about language, it's about skin color, it's about culture. It's so much to it. Like the categorization is just completely arbitrary. And that is why they come to the power of social construction and how does that play into ourselves. Is I don't have a problem if the definition of the word is changed, because I think generally words tend to have social utility, and I don't see anybody being harmed from the changing of the definition.
so the
I
thing
don't.
is, I think that's different from, you're talking about what we define as feminine, right? Feminine versus masculine. Am I getting your argument right?
Even I sure, but I could even say man and woman. The definition.
But then that I think that is distinct from asking what is a woman, because asking what is a woman, you are also conflating with him asking what is feminine, and you are also conflating the gender and sex, and I'm trying to separate those things and saying, when we say man and woman, that is really just talking about the biology, but we can have this open and flowing conversation about
Yeah, but
masculinity and femininity, but on a certain level we can't dilute the definitions of what a man and a woman is
no, it's
because
not
of
that.
this
Why is
higher
it?
level of conversation, because we would actually want to know, like, we need to know if someone is biologically a man or a woman if we're going to give them a certain dose of medication.
No, we need to know if somebody have a specific chroma. This is the point I'm trying to make. There's no why is it somebody call a man? There's no objective reason why a person is a man. It's just socially we attribute certain thing to a person, then consider him to be a man. If you want to give a person a specific dose of medication, you don't need to know if a man or not. You just need to know if you have a specific amount of testosterone, these chromosome build up. Is where the society brought in this idea that a person has to have X,
So
Y, X to be a
so
man.
you're
That is the
this thing is mostly
Kevin,
semantic then, because then we have no definition. Like, we're humans, we use words. So there's, what is a fish? Technically we are fish. Technically all birds are dinosaurs, or where we can't necessarily go down the rabbit hole of,
no,
oh,
it's
we've
not
made
the
all these arbitrary decisions, because we've made arbitrary decisions
it's
across
arbitrary.
all the
That is a
world.
I think you're taking certain historical development for granted. What is a fish? We do like There's no objective definition to what is a fish. There's nothing written in the universe that says this is a fish, this is a bag, this is this. There's no objective definition in the universe. We as a society has bought into certain definition
Is
that
there
we
is
as
there any
can.
is there anything objective in this world that we're currently living? Is there anything that you can say, you can
Well,
look at and say this is objective?
I am trying
Kevin,
to, of course, there are objective difference between men and women. That
But
is
what
a
is
fact.
that?
There,
But
what is that
that's
difference?
in the
How
what
do you identify? How do you label
all
that
right.
difference?
I'm
If
going to give a perfect. I'm going to give a perfect
How do you
example.
label that difference? Just
Somebody
look. No,
says,
yes.
wait a minute.
Wait.
Somebody said to
Please.
me that,
Let me just answer my. Let me ask my question. Sorry, please. Now you have observed a difference because we are human beings and we like to communicate. Now you want to be able to communicate that observed difference to another human being in a way that they understand. You are not ascribing value to that difference. You just want to communicate that difference. So how would you label that difference?
so a perfect example is this. There is an objective difference between a phone and a computer, but the definition of a phone and a computer is arbitrary. Thing that is easy to grasp. So this idea of how we define a computer or a phone is completely subjective because there's no objective definition of what a phone and a computer is. But what we can say is based on the categorization that we have created, the objective difference between the both of them. And it's the same thing. That is the purpose of category. Is the idea of category is to categorize and compartmentalize. And the point is, we can always expand a category if we identify that a category has some deficiencies or insufficiency in its categorization. That is the point. So there's no, this is where we come on to this idea of descriptive and prescriptive reality is that we can observe the differences, but those differences lie within arbitrarity. That is the point.
All right, let's get Steve in. Steve, all right, jump right in again.
I don't know. I've literally lost like 5 or 6 topics that I can't even speak about. Yeah, I don't know. Like all I know is this is we're sitting here running around in circles for the last fucking hour. Haven't gotten anywhere because there's too many interruptions. People aren't being careful and trying to understand people's opinions. I don't know if I really want to add to that chaos.
Steve, you have the floor, so speak. No one is interrupting you now.
Well, as Cody has put forward really well, and I think Kevin has put forward really well, and I think we're all making the mistake of conflating gender with sex. And like I said at the beginning, on females a certain expectation idly for God knows how long, centuries on. And when we finally got comfortable into a society that we didn't have to hold so rigidly to those ideas and those constructs, we began to break out of them because they weren't needed anymore. Right. So now we have a problem of is this sex or is this gender? Because they're two completely different things. But people keep conflating that within this conversation. So that's why we're not making any ground. You can if you look at what a female is biologically, there's obvious certain indicators that we can say this person is biologically female. Nobody's refuting that. What I'm refuting and what Cody is refuting and what I think Kevin's refuting is the fact that we're moving other constructs from gender over into the sex column, and that's not good. That's not relevant because those attributes can be placed on anybody on either spectrum at any time, and they don't have to hold all of them all at once. So whatever makes a woman, every single attribute of that can be shared with men or biological males who identify as masculine men, can still share some of those attributes. And this is the exact same conversation that's been that happened throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and as far as the gay conversation was concerned. So it's just frustrating that we keep getting caught up with crossing over these boundaries between the biological and the psychological. And that's the distinction that I was trying to make.
Okay. Um, Christina said most males and most females self-identify as their sexual biology about 95 to 96% of the time. So is there no validity in that if the majority of people correctly self-identify with, you know, they have this feature, they have this biological feature, and then they identify with the social construction that 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 is associated with those features, isn't their identification, isn't it valid? Could
What do you mean
can't
by
we
validity?
Um,
Okay, can't we look at it and say, with the sheer amount of statistical um, data or statistical significant data associated with self identification with a particular social construction, can't we say that it is because it is very, very true, it is very, very valid, that is why most people are able to, you know, correctly self identify with the social construction around their biological sex?
um, so to respond to that is that's perfectly fine if 95% of people want to identify as male or female, but you have to understand that that's a poll, and polls are by definition a subjective perspective on the question itself. If you're looking for a better response to that, I can't know one. You know what I mean? Because polls are polls. They are subjective by nature. They are how one views themselves within the world. So they're automatically considered subjective. What you can do is you can look at it in a different light, which is how many people identify with their culturally subjective view of what femininity is. Sure, you're still appealing to authority and using a subjective experience as a argument.
Well,
But it's a
Agreed.
valid argument that I would say, but you have to keep those other facts in mind.
one thing before Augie jumps in, I will say this, and I realized this, a few years back. I don't identify as a woman, right? I don't identify as one. I just am one because the biology is obvious. So I haven't necessarily consciously thought like I have to do this because they're going to treat me like woman. It's just a fact of life for me. And I think that this new conversation about trans issues is making people feel like they picked a side or they have to pick a side. When I think before, this trans conversation, people would have never thought about quote unquote identifying as a man or a woman. They just like, yeah, this is what I am. And I think we're adding an extra layer of you have to now, think about this. And I think sometimes people think themselves into knots when if this kind of topic in this way wasn't kind of posed, they wouldn't even have answered that that question. That poll was getting people to answer is kind of it's making people actively identify as their biological sex when before they didn't have a distinction between that.
I can somewhat agree with what you just said, but I think this is just a natural part of society progressing and society being more inclusive of everybody. Because I mean, certain people back in the days was discriminated against. I'm sure we are okay now with society becoming more accepting of gay people. if we look back into Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, transmission was always being studied there, and those people were killed and tortured or whatever. So those people has always been around, but there was a deliberate attempt to somewhat eradicate them from society. And I think the fact now that we're becoming more inclusive of everybody is something that we have to reckon with. It's just yeah, in my opinion, it's just a natural consequence
Yeah,
of society. In my opinion, moving in the right direction, to say the least.
Yeah, I think in general, like it's history has shown that in terms of anthropology, like gender non-conforming people, and meaning that the people who the gender role that is associated with their biological sex, there have always been people that, go left when people thought they, oh, we thought that they would go right. Okay. And there have been various opposite, like, some cultures oppose it, some cultures actually make like a specific role for them where they acknowledge their they are gender non-conforming. So whether they're defined as two-spirit, or they have a specific role, they have a specific term for people who are biologically female but have a role of a man, or people who are biologically male and have the role of a woman, right? I know, my friend who is the Squamish, lives on the reservation, and she was talking about this, like how there was a female chief, which that was the term for a man, but like they acknowledged that she was biologically a woman and had like 4 wives. And so that type of thing has been, that break within society, I think, in all cultures has always existed. And I think that, yeah, like it's the same thing. Like all cultures have to like figure out how they're going to deal with it. And
Hmm.
I have no problem with, I don't even have a problem with trans women, going in with me, like into in a public restroom, right? I don't even have issues with that. And I think it's also an issue of like practicality of like, there's no way we're going to actually have a law, like to have like a police officer, like check the genitals of every single person that walks into a women's bathroom. That's creepy. But, it's still like an individual social thing as to who you're going to interact with and how you're going to treat them. I don't think we can legislate that from the top down. It's still a peer-to-peer issue that we would have to deal with.
Agree.
All right, okay, jump in. Okay, we can't hear you.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I said, yeah, good. Glad to join you, beautiful people. I had to quickly catch a ride from work. Ask a colleague to drive me down so I could, jump on. So hi, Steve. Hi, Chloe. Hi, Kevin. Hi, Cody. Hope you
Hey,
guys
okay.
are having a smashing afternoon. And I mean, I've been listening to the conversation for a while, and I think you guys are presenting very good points, especially more pertaining to I guess, the clear, what I call a linguistic distinction between, sex and gender. However, my premise of contention has to do more with what I feel about how the question was answered. Because I think the question posed to KTJ was one that was meant to elicit a personal subjective response. They didn't is it Marsha Brown, her name? The lady that posed the question to her anyways wasn't asking for the definition, right? She wasn't asking for the definition of a woman. She was asking for a. So I kind of felt like the way the question was worded, KTJ could have, taken it wherever she wanted, but responded with a certain level of sincerity. And that was what I kind of felt was missing from that conversation. And it kind of became more political based answer. And for me, once politics starts getting into how things are perceived or defined, then it's kind of like, well, fine, I have to kind of take a step back. So in saying that, I'm looking at the dictionary definition of a woman. So I would read from the American the American Dictionary of the English Language, which defines, one second here, which defines woman. It's the same word as femina. The Latin is written F for W. The plural as written seems to be women, but we pronounce it women, and so it ought to be written for it's from the Saxon wife man. However, I think this is kind of going to the denotative definition. The female of the human race grown to adult years. So even within this definition, I could see a what how do I put it? I could see a obvious conflation between gender and sex. But I think the dictionary clarifies that because it goes the female of the human race grown to adult years. Okay. And then, when I bounce back to look at, okay, fine, how does it define female? It goes among animals, one of that sex which conceives and brings forth young. Among plants, that which produces fruits, and a nothing, a noting the sex which produces. So female basically means biology. That's kind of what I get from the definition of female, and then the social definition of woman. So I think you all have pretty much done that in terms of like pointing out the reason why it's important to clarify between uh, the definition as the social definition, woman, and the definition as biology. But I must also add that, in terms of the rank and file, I would offer that most, no, okay, I would offer, in my opinion, that a lot of people use both interchangeably. So to me, for example, or instance, a woman is a mature biological female. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Oge. So Little Miss Pickles was asking, why is the question always what is a woman? Why not what is a man? So
That
maybe the next one we're going to ask what is a man. So we'll take off the heat of women.
that's a good
Um,
point. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I didn't want this stream to go on for that long. It's more than an hour now. So if we still have anything else to add, Steve, let's hear you, Steve.
Yeah, I got to go here pretty soon because I'm done with work and I got to take my son home. So, the distinction that I was trying to make both in the Discord and on here is that the ways that we think about social constructs have changed over time significantly to the point where the ones that we used in the 1800s are not the ones that we're using in the 2000s, right? So we have to understand that those constructs are changing the more our society becomes more egalitarian, more fair, more peaceful, more prosperous, and all these other wonderful benefits of living in our society today. And I think it's important that we keep our minds open to what is coming, and to be able to do this and question it and be like, hey, does this make sense? No, yes. Those are obviously important things to take into consideration. We should talk about them. But I don't like casting other people into molds that I didn't create myself and they didn't create themselves, but are unfortunately forced on them by a society who chooses to still use those same constructs. So I just want everybody to know that I appreciate you guys, and hope to see you guys soon.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. But before you go, you said we're using archaic definitions. So why does this current definition, Steve has gone, but I wanted to ask him, why is this current definition any more valid than the definition of old? What is the what's the objective basis for saying definitions of old doesn't make sense? You have to be able to prove that those definitions did not make sense, and there is a need for us to adopt the current one, other than it being a social, because it, this definition may very well be also a social construction. And if it's a social construction, the previous one was a social construction. Why is this social construction better than the previous social construction?
I
But
don't think he was. Oh, sorry.
no, no, go ahead if you wanted to respond to that.
Oh, I don't think Steve was talking about definite new definitions being better. I think he was touching on how concepts of gender roles have evolved over generations, such as in Europe and the other areas influenced by European culture. Female gender roles required wearing dresses, but that eventually evolved to where people gendered as women were allowed to wear pants or socially accepted as wearing pants. So I think he was touching about the evolution of gender roles and how concepts of gender and what behaviors are acceptable from people based on how they are sexed evolve over generations and change.
Yeah, but the thing
Yeah.
is, I don't disagree with that, and I don't think anybody disagrees with that. We can update the gender roles while still maintaining that this is objectively female. For example, I gave an
Yeah,
example of myself, that I myself, I do things that are traditionally female. Even my dad cooks, and I can say my dad is even a better cook than my mom. I do all kind of domestic work that you would typically say this is a female work. You understand? He doesn't make me any less of a man because I'm doing female, in quotes, female roles. So we can update those roles without the need for us to destroy the categories. It is not the roles that make the person, from our own observation. It is not the roles that make the person. It is the person that is primary. Then any other thing around it, we can walk around it. Like I said earlier, I'm not saying that these gender roles should be cast in stone. I'm not saying that these gender roles are even good, but that the point is there's something objectively that is a woman, there's something objectively that is a man. There might be some roles that are assigned to both, which we might need to update. And once we update those things, then there is no reason to destroy the categories. But people are thinking that it is the roles itself that is that thing. But it's not true. So if everybody starts doing the same role, if both men and women start doing exactly the same role, then do we still have a category called woman? Do we still have a category called man? If everybody does the same thing, all the roles become equal and similar. In that instance, would we still have a woman category or a man category, because the roles are basically the same now?
I guess that would depend on the culture. That's a very abstract question with no definite answer.
Well, I think I have, unless Augie has something, because you can.
No, Chloe, you can go. Yeah.
So, I mean,
you can go. Yeah.
So, I mean, I've started a new job and no one has acknowledged my gender or sex at all, right? Yeah, they might say she and blah, 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 but like outside of, just, how they have to talk to me, no one has acknowledged anything about my biology. And then recently I had to fill out a profile on my company's website, right? You had to fill out all your job history and everything like that. No mention and nowhere where I literally had to check the box male or female or man or woman, because in this context it literally doesn't matter, and there's no factor of sex or gender that has no impact on the work that we're doing or how we officially have to interact with each other on our meetings or on our whatever. It only really matters socially, and I think that we kind of are. Honestly, I think we're kind of overthinking it, as if all of these realms of gender exist uniformly on all sectors of life. Like if you have if you need an accountant to go over your numbers before you file your taxes, no one is going to. There's no way really to search for, I'm looking for a male attorney, a male accountant or a female accountant. You're just kind of looking at the rankings of who maybe has like the company that has like the best ratings or approval, like Yelp numbers. But these these things only really matter when we are social and when we're interfacing. If I am dating somebody, then it actually probably matters as to their gender, or their gender or sex, right? Like when someone is looking for a partner, if they want to have kids, the sex of the other person matters. And then how, and also if you want to build a life with them, what aspect of the gender roles are willing to fulfill. Like if you're a woman who doesn't cook, but you're like looking for a husband, it'll be really nice to find a husband that can cook really well, right? And it's an individual social thing that I feel like it's being abstracted on such a large level that there's no way that we can all handle it on a large societal level, because um in that in itself is a social construction, as if like we can just make these rules on like a Supreme Court level and have that actually apply to actually how we interface with on our day-to-day lives. Because I know people that would say, yeah, like they would agree that like anybody can be a woman or blah 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 blah, but that still at the end of the day, when they're trying to who they swipe left or right on Tinder, is still a very individual personal reason. And even though they may socially say one thing, they will individually on a social level make a different decision. And I think that trying to aggregate and all of these decisions, as if we can really at the end of the day change someone's personal preferences, I think it's kind of a moot point, because for the most part, what is a woman, most contexts, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter for them in most cases, unless we are making personal choices.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, sorry.
Sir Cody, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Would you do you think that sorry, maybe this is, and anyone can also jump in as well. Do you think um the question that do you think it would have been more, it would have elicited a more cogent response if she had just said, um how do you define a female, as opposed to um how do you define a woman?
Yeah, I think it would have, and I agree with your point that you made earlier, in that
Okay.
the question was asked in a partisan context.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I think we all agree that was very partisan, and I think that that's the Matt Walsh inspired them to ask that question,
Oh,
because
yeah.
the answer to that question, like that became a political flashpoint to indicate their political leanings of how you
Okay,
answer that question.
fair point.
Yeah, and I would like to expand earlier on, Chloe's comments, about my own personal, identity, and that I am sexed as male, but I don't identify as a man, and that's
Mhm.
because, I fit the definitions of, being morphologically male and gonadally male because I have a penis and testicles, but I don't feel that the gender roles of the society that I grew up in really meshed with my own personality, because when I grew up, I saw boys being violent and sexually aggressive towards other girls, and I often was called faggot growing up because I did not want to fight with other boys, and I did not want
Mhm.
to sexually pursue other girls in a way that I viewed as sexual harassment, honestly. And so, for that reason and others, I never identified with the masculine gender roles of the culture that I grew up in. So that's why I identify as being agender or non binary. Even though I am considered rather masculine by other people because of my deep voice and physical appearance, I don't think that I really want to limit my personality or sense of self based on other people's standards of what a man or a woman is.
Okay, Cody. Now, this is what I will say to that. I don't, I don't think that, and I'm not trying to be offensive, but I don't think that your being a man or being a man should have been dependent on whether or not you take on those characteristics that are sort of typified to be male characteristics. I, I, I think those are two divorced things, because those behaviors you just outlined there aren't particularly male behaviors that just perform the performances. They might occur with much more frequency in a typical male, but it doesn't even make it a male characteristic. So
Charles.
in that
Okay.
sense, in that sense, it is not those characteristics that defines the gender. It is the person himself that defines what the gender is, and the person may or may not display certain characteristics that are typical of that gender. I keep using an example of myself and say that I may not be the most typical man because there are so many things that, for example, I'm a very, very law abiding, very, very um, pacifist kind of person. I don't like physical altercations or violence or all those sort of things, getting into brawls that you might want to associate with men. But that doesn't mean I'm not a man because I don't think those things define me as a man. Those things are just characteristics that are external. You understand? So
Yeah,
that's
I
I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. So
Yep, I know Augie had a response. I would like to say, though, that gets into the point I was trying to make earlier about there being, see, that concepts of gender identity fall on a spectrum, or more that there's polythetic definitions of gender, so that there are different gender roles or behaviors deemed acceptable for people, but a person need not embody all of them to be gendered.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say. Sorry, Cody, are you done?
Go, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Charles. Like, I think from what I hear from Cody, I think Cody is basically trying to say, the biological side is that's organic to him, but it's the cultural side, right? The imposed cultural hyper masculine side. That's the side that he was basically pushing against. Or Cody, am I getting you correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So
No,
that
Adrian
makes
got it. Oh, sorry.
yeah, it makes sense. That makes sense. That makes
Yeah, and I
that
know
makes
that this
sense.
isn't unique to the culture that I was raised in either, because my ex, who was from
Mhm.
a different culture, she again too called me weak and said that I was a woman because I did not embody the masculine gender roles and behaviors that she expected from a man. And
Yeah.
that's part of the reason why our relationship fell apart, because I was not willing to change my personality to fit her expectations.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Cody, sorry, I'm very, very glad you made this last statement. You were not ready to change your personality, which is what I think all this is just about. I think these are just personality differences which can exist in a spectrum. People have different personalities. They
Yes.
can be more feminine, they can be more masculine. You understand? The personality exists from a spectrum of this end to the other end. And if we see it in that regard, it will make more sense than saying that this is a gender thing. This is a personality thing because not even the so-called typical male typical characteristics, not all men would behave like that. Even the so-called female typical characteristics, not all women will behave like that because they have what different personalities. So even though the sex and the gender may be constant, the personalities or how they express themselves as it relates to the sex and their gender is different because people have different personalities, and that's the way it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
mhm.
Okay. Yeah, Charles. Yeah, I see where you're coming. Chloe, you wanted to say
Well,
something?
this reminds me of because growing up, and this is one reason why I really like listening to at least especially female to male to female detransitioners is I empathize with them because one reason this is what a lot of girls kind of grow up as, right, as we're getting into maturation, we're growing the secondary the sex characteristics, and suddenly it dawns upon us that we are expected to be the gender role women, right, and we look at society and we dread it, and we notice these things in ourselves. It's like, well, I don't want to wear makeup, I don't want to wear dresses, I don't want to do all these things. I think a lot more girls go through this than maybe is projected, or maybe they're trying to force it, or whatever. But we always kind of feel that disconnect when we realize we're about to enter in a world that is, that type of gender role. And a part of growing up is deciding for ourselves what we're choosing to keep and what we're willing to play with, or what we realize that we have to just deal with, people expecting certain things from us. And an issue I see about, again, this conflation between sex and gender, and like, gender roles and how you feel about yourselves, and some girls are being forced to feel like they have to choose, and they say like, well, I don't want to wear dresses, I don't want to wear makeup, I don't want to be sexualized by men, therefore I must be a man, because men aren't like those things don't happen to men, like, tell that to gay men, right? Some gay, or like, what we would call twinks, right? But like, they and so I see like a lot of issues coming from this conflation. And when it's very interesting seeing, a lot of these these detransitioned females, when they realize, it clicks in their head, I am a woman, but I don't, like, life doesn't need to be the way that I thought it would be, or what quote unquote society was telling me what being a woman was going to be like, what my quote unquote role was going to be. They realize, oh, it's not what's shown on Instagram, it's not what's shown on commercials. It actually, the reality of it is a lot, less dramatic. And that's just the thing that women kind of have to deal with in general, of like, oh, there's a societal role, but like, I'm normal, right? Like, most of the images of women that we see on TV, or like what is told to us is the role, don't fit most women, right? Look at fashion. Most of those things that those fashion models walk down the runway with, 90% of women can't fit in those things. So I think people are kind of taking some of these abstractions even too seriously, because we have like this idea of gender role on a higher level, but there is a more realistic day-to-day experience of what it's actually like to be a woman. And I see, even on that level, the conflation causes issues, because from what you see, like, if you look on TV and see what it's like to be a woman, do you really think that if you look to your wife next to you, or your partner next to you, her life is going to be exactly like that? Most people are going to realize, no, it's not. So it's like we have abstractions upon abstractions that even on that level we're conflating.
Wow.
Agreed.
Yeah, nicely said, Chloe. Nicely said.
That's why I prefer a non binary identity, because I cannot fit the stereotypes that are projected in popular culture or by other people onto me, and therefore I refuse to try.
Okay, so like we said earlier, what percentage of the stereotypes do someone need to fit before before he can say he identifies as a particular gender? What percentage of the male stereotypes, taking into consideration that this also differs from culture to culture? There are some cultures that women will do roles that other cultures might see as a male typical role. You understand? So, what proportion of the stereotypical male characteristics do you need to display before you can identify as a male? And what proportion of the typical female characteristics do you need to display before you can identify as a woman?
I don't know, and I'm sure you'd get as many different answers as people you asked.
Exactly. Which which just goes to show that this is a personality thing, because personalities differ, and people would even personalities differ even within a lifetime.
Hmm.
I, I, for example, myself, I was much more shy when I was younger. I wouldn't say I am now. I couldn't talk to crowds before, but now I actually crave talking to crowds and all that. So my personality has changed, but who I am as a person, my being hasn't changed. You understand? So to me, I think we are mixing two things. Let's say gender and gender roles. I don't think those two things are the same thing. Gender is different. The roles is different. The roles is fluid. The roles associated with the gender is fluid. It can change. It can be updated. It can go either way. But that thing itself, that that the roles is sort of resting on, that thing is objective and that thing is real.
So Charles, to you, and just in your understanding, you are using gender and sex as synonymous.
Yes, of course, I
Okay.
am.
Okay. I mean, for me, I would, as a matter of fact, because this conversation is for me, there's a lot to reflect on. I mean, good information though, because for me, where I stand now, I would basically parse it into three. For me, it would be sex, and with gender, that would obviously be socially ascribed roles. And then I'm kind of really contemplating your the third piece, which is what you brought up, personality, right? Just kind of looking at it as three distinct things that could just kind of looking at it as three distinct things, just more from a clarity perspective, because I kind of see value in um, how these concepts have been explored. I don't personally think I would use sex and gender as synonymous, right? I don't think I would do that, but I think you add in the third piece of personality. I think that's also something moving forward that would be a good thing for me to consider. So thanks.
Yeah, and I would go further and say to give a definition of personality, personality is a characteristic set of behaviors, cognitions, and emotional patterns. And again, back to definition of gender, the cultural construction of beliefs and behaviors considered appropriate for each sex. So the issue with gender is that it assumes that a person must believe and believe certain things and behave in certain ways based on their sex. And the thing is that does not always match with the natural personality of each individual. And there comes a lot of issue when you are expected and sometimes forced to believe certain things or behave in certain ways that do not mesh with your personality.
Got it. The sound, yeah.
Yeah. And I guess my point is that those tensions come up just in personal social, I think in when the rubber meets the road, like if you like your example, when you're dating somebody who expects you to be who you're not, or when you first meet somebody and they say like, oh, you're a girl, I thought you would like this. But I think people aren't really, I have a little bit more faith in people of like, once they make that mistake with a single person, they will adjust to that personality and to that individual. And then after they're wrong so many times, then they will relax their definition, right? I remember in school, right? Someone was saying, oh yeah, the girls in who are in computer science are just weird. And then he looked at me and he was like, oh, sorry. And I'm like, oh no, like, yeah, like I agreed, because the people who are in computer science, like both men and women, yeah, they are weird. So that was my opinion on them, because I was in engineering. And so I was like, oh yeah, so yeah, I guess you're technically true. You're technically right. But they're like, I think it does make sense to, on a certain level, people aren't necessarily wholly given these whole gender roles, and then they're just applying them unobjectively or without actually observing anything, because people tend to keep the things that they see, okay, this rule tends to work, and they're going to keep it, and then things that they're like wrong about, they're going to discard. So like this guy, he would never have said, oh, women can't do math and science. He's literally talking about women who have chosen to do that as a profession, right? So he obviously, even though that stereotype exists in larger society, he has already discarded that. And he's only kind of interacting with the objective things that he is noticing that is different from women who are in computer science versus the women who are in other engineering fields, right? And I think that's fair. And so I think that people aren't as, simplistic as just, again, wholeheartedly taking things from society. We do tend to pick and choose. Like there are probably some gender stereotypes that we can hear about, from 100 years ago. And even the most ardent, like person who believes in gender roles and all these things these things are fixed, they'll be like, what? That makes no sense. Right. So like, yeah, like these concepts have changed, but we are still mapping actual things that we're experiencing onto reality. And so um, it's not completely arbitrary is my point.
Charles, can I ask you one question? Just kind of be an example, just more to
Sure. Go
yeah,
ahead.
just parse apart sex and gender. Now, you know, back home in Nigeria, we have this okay, like with my daughter, um, sometimes to put her to sleep or to you play with her, I would, what we call backing now, right? When you back a child.
Yep.
Yes. So for Chloe and Cody, backing a child is basically a role that is more common with women, right? It's more either used to soothe the child. So by backing a child, you put the child on your back, and then you would get a wrapper, a
Piece of cloth.
a piece of cloth, and then you would secure the child to your back. Okay, so that function or that role is normally a mother or normally the role left for a female within the context of uh, Yoruba, Benin, Nigerian society, right? So, but I do that with my daughter, okay? But I do that understanding that I do that understanding the context, which is more within the auspices of gender, but I do it and I don't care. You see what I'm saying, Charles? Even though it is something more, it is a function some more normally carried out by women or women or biological females. It is still something that a man can still perform.
Okay, so let me get into this. I'm the first of five children, and I can tell you for a fact that I did back my younger ones, my siblings, this same way you just said when we were kids. So even though it was a female typical role, it didn't mean it was exclusive to females. It didn't mean it was exclusive to women, that only women could do it. Now,
Okay, got it.
because I was the first child, I definitely had to do a lot of, I had to cook, I had to clean, I had to take care of my younger ones and all that. And growing up in my house, there wasn't a female specific role or male specific role, even though we understood men and women were different, but we all did everything together because it needed to be done. Now, even though I started cooking way before my younger sister, who is like 2 years younger than me, but she's a better cook than myself. You know, there's still that female touch, but that's just by the wayside. So the thing is, these roles are not what defines the gender. These roles are fluid, even though society might expect that okay, more of more of this particular gender would do this thing. It doesn't mean the other gender cannot do it under any circumstance. It might just be because of the peculiarities of what is happening at that particular time. So we can actually say, let us have an evolution of gender roles. Let us have
Hmm.
an update of gender roles, but not to say that gender itself is socially constructed or it doesn't exist. It is the roles itself, the roles themselves that are socially constructed, and those roles
Okay.
can be updated.
Okay. Okay. So basically, the way you distinct it is gender as biology and gender roles as social construction.
Yeah.
Okay.
And these social constructions are not fixed. They can be changed. They can be anything we want it to be. Yep. So I think this would be a good place to draw this conversation to a close. So let's hear your thoughts, Cody, Ogie, Chloe. Then I would give my
Yeah, well,
piece.
see, I would like to say that that's a point that gender roles or gender identities are fluid, even though some others might say that you are less of a man for caring for children that way. Those people are trying to force an unrealistically rigid concept of gender identity. And see, again, to throw the point forward more, people with very rigid concepts of gender identity assume that people must subscribe to the behaviors and beliefs uh, projected onto them by the cultural norms based on how they're sexed. The thing is that not every individual fits those the personality traits. Again, some people they are born personalities that do not fit into the culture that they're raised in, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, and they shouldn't be forced to fit those molds.
Yeah, thank you, Cody. Um, okay.
Yeah, Cody, and it's just a bit unfortunate that Steve had to leave, but I kind of feel like, you guys were doing enough. As a matter of fact, this is one podcast that I think I've learned the most, and I just want to commend like your brilliant insights, Charles, Cody, and Chloe, because you guys may not know this, but you've taught me a lot through the course of this discourse. And to be to be very transparent, even the subject of gender is not. I don't want to say I've like kind of consciously avoided it, and not really uh, how do I put it? Try to learn more about it. So I think this conversation is creating the opportunity for me to actually sit down and just and learn more. Learn more, get a bit of uh, firmer understanding of these things. The issues, challenges, the merits and whatnot. But I think you guys having this conversation is, I just want to commend you all. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ogie. Chloe.
Hey, yeah, and I think it's very important that we're all acknowledging that there's a difference between biology and the social. Like, yeah, so there's multiple levels. So there's biology, there's your personality, and then there's a social context, and all of those things are kind of mixing together. But still, at the end of the day, you know, even though like strangers that you don't know have this, that they have a concept of what certain things are, if they're male or female or weak or strong or whatever. At the end of the day, it's really the relationships that matter is how the people you care about or the people that you interact with treat you. And I think it matters more so with them, if how they are fitting you into a box in which there are many boxes that they can put you in. They can think that you're dumb. They can think that you are, because you're poor, they treat you a certain way. Or, oh, this is a great guy or this is a great girl or whatever. They did this one thing for me, so I'm there. Everything that they do from now on is golden to me, and they're always going to give you the benefit of a doubt. And I think those types of relationships and how people, those types of categorizations matter in our day-to-day lives a lot more than this really, really, really abstract concept of like popular culture and social media, which I don't think, like, those things have less of an argument of being real, because what if the next Marvel movie somehow defines what a woman is, but like the majority of people in the world don't even watch that movie, so how much power does it really have over us? So I would caution people actually giving too much power to these symbols of masculinity or femininity, when if you actually look at your day-to-day life, it has no power there. So we have to resist giving up our agency or letting an outside force us to define ourselves in a very particular way, when we can just not really define ourselves and just let our personalities be.
Yeah, thank you, Chloe. So finally, I would say, when when have human beings ever agreed on anything by any measure of definition, even things that are objectively true? Human beings have never agreed on how to act towards it, and that has never invalidated the objectivity or the truth of that. Let's take culture, for example. There are certain cultural norms. Maybe take myself, for example. I come from a certain tribe. There are certain cultural norms that are specific to my tribe. It might be language, it might be dress, and all that. But I don't, there are some things in my culture that I don't do. There are some things in my culture that I am not so familiar with. It doesn't make me any less of my tribe because I don't do those things. It isn't those things that define me as someone of my tribe. It is that I am of that tribe. All those things can change. Those things are fluid. Those things can be updated. And that is the same way I see this gender thing. It is not the roles that define what gender is. Gender is the base on which those roles are placed upon. And those roles are not definite. Those roles can change, those roles can be updated, those roles can be anything that we human beings want it to be. We could all wake up today and say, okay, a woman's gender role today is to be the breadwinner, and the man's gender role is to stay at home and take care of the kids. That would be fine if that's what we want it to be. You understand? But to say that there is no such thing, there's nothing objectively a man, that it is the roles that gives value, that in itself is the social constructionist argument, because the social constructionist is telling you that it is the roles that create that particular category. But I believe that that category exists irrespective of the roles, such that even when the roles change, as they indeed have changed, because what it means to be a woman today is not the same thing that it meant to be a woman 100 years ago. It has changed, but the category of woman still exists, still persists, because there is something substantive about it, even though the rules associated with it is fluid and can change. So that's the way I want us to be looking at this, and that is the way I see it. So I really want to appreciate everyone. Steve, thank you very much as usual. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. I really appreciate. Thank you for coming to the stream. Cody, as usual, brilliant mind. Chloe, Little Miss Pickles, Christina Bang, Anan, Mr. Pelu, everyone who came to the stream today. Thank you very much for coming. And next time, we'll definitely have to talk about what is a man, so that will take the pressure off what is a woman for once. So thank you guys. I'll catch you guys in another stream. It's goodbye
Thank
for
you.
now.
Yep.
Thanks. Bye.